Hi there, welcome to the next video for the Vickers MG Collection and Research Association. This is one of our Q&A videos, so if you've got any questions, let us know in the comments below, message us, start a chat about it, whatever mechanism you can, but get in touch and ask us those questions because it's actually really interesting for us as well. This set of questions were born from the first video that we did, and they've meant that we've had to go and research some material as well. So we're getting those questions through Patreon, where hopefully you're going to sign up and become a patron and support the association financially, because that's incredibly important for us at the moment. But also Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and let's say in the comments, Instagram, all of those different outlets. Please like, share, subscribe this video, and subscribe to our channel, to all of those different pages, so that we can get you with different lots of news that we want to share and hopefully you're interested in. So as we get into the first question of the 5 that we'll be dealing with this week or this month, what I want to talk about is I'm stood about is in front of our Australian Vickers machine gun, and the reason is, the question was, did Lithgow, the small arms factory in Australia in New South Wales, ever supply Australian-made machine guns, Vickers machine guns, to the British Army? Now, from what we can find, and we've got the British Army contract records, we've got the Small Arms Committee minutes, the Ordnance Board memoranda, and we've got the history of Lithgow itself, having visited there, and it's a great location to visit if you ever are in the New South Wales area. Big area, I know, but it's a great location to visit. The Small Arms Factory Collection Museum there. That's where the Vickers machine guns were made, from Oz, and from what we can work out, no. There was no official mechanism for Vickers machine guns to be provided to the British Army, however, from Lithgow. However, it's likely that it happened under some of the local arrangements in North Africa, in the Middle East, where Australian forces were working alongside the British. So we're never going to say never, and we're never going to say we've exhausted the archives completely, because there's always more. But what we have found is that the British Army did trial compatibility in 1927, I think it is, might be wrong, might be 26, around that period, because Lithgow started making components first and eventually built up to making a whole Vickers by 1929. And so what we can see is they had locks, they built some bits and pieces. And the Lithgow history, written by Tony Griffiths, actually talks about requests and supply of spares for the Vickers. So not whole guns, but spare parts. So it's entirely feasible, and we haven't exhausted the contract ledgers yet on this, because they're massive documents and take a long time to go through. We've checked the gun purchase ledger, and there's no mention of any whole Vickers machine guns being purchased from Lithgow. There are rifles and Bren guns, it seems, certainly post the Battle of France in 1940. The Lithgow history mentions that they sent across short magazine Lee Enfield rifles and Bren guns over to the British then, but no mention of Vickers machine guns. You've got to bear in mind that we actually had quite a lot of Vickers machine guns as our legacy from the Great War, where we had many more divisions and infantry divisions that needed Vickers in their machine gun battalions, whereas in the Second World War we had that bigger mix of armoured and infantry divisions. So we had a lower requirement, it seems, for the Vickers. Even to the point that a machine gun battalion in the late war only has 36 Vickers machine guns rather than 48 of the time, or 64 of the time of the first, at the end of the First World War. So we probably could cope with the supply and demand that we had ourselves, but it is really interesting to see this spare parts issue come up. So we're going to do some more research on that. But for now, I think we can quite strongly say that there were no official channels for the Australians to supply the British with Vickers machine guns, and it would have been on a one-for-one replacement basis, and perhaps transferring through stores. But we did test the compatibility of those in the Small Arms Committee minutes. There is, the sort of extensive testing discussed to show about compatibility of parts. So interesting subject, one certainly enjoyed looking through, and something that we'll probably dive into a little bit more in the future. So this next question, question 2, is about how long does a Vickers barrel last? Which is a really interesting question because there's no definitive answer, and it seems in a way that the British Army weren't too worried about it until towards the end of the Second World War. Because they conducted an endurance trial, this is 24th of March 1917, that really is inconclusive about barrel life. None of the manuals or anything actually say a fixed number of rounds for a barrel, because there's so many variables. What's the rate of fire? How many stoppages occurred? How much water was in there? What type of ammunition was it? What was the manufacturer? So all of these different variables, and they went through it in some detail. Doing different measurements, gauging at the end of the trial. So this October 1916 trial is about a barrel. Is an hour's trial, and they fire 13,750 rounds. They use a gun AL 6273. So if you've got that, you've got a very special gun. Let us know. And then they gauge everything at the end of the trial, and the conclusion's really interesting. So let's where did that conclusion end up? It says it's considered that the endurance of the gun will outlast the endurance of any one firer, and when the trial was stopped at the end of the first hour, the gun was running rather better than at the beginning, and might have continued indefinitely until the barrel was worn out. When? No, nobody knows. So it was very much down to the armourers to run some accuracy trials, and to gauge it, to do visual inspection of the rifling. And that took place until 1944, when everybody got a little bit worked up about it again. And the Military College of Science, the Small Arms branch, started to conduct some trials. And this is the assessment of the remaining barrel life when firing Mark 8Z ammunition. October 1944. And it said, what's the barrel life panel? What's the practicable means? And basically they come up with, they review what the works that's happened, some of the opinions. They have they talk about the Barlow method, which J.A. Barlow, Jocelyn Arthur Barlow, Brigadier Barlow, wrote the small arms manuals, the small books, did that on the side of being, Small Arms Committee and one of the ordnance officers. And he suggested this mechanism of gauging the barrel. Now, in October 44, the recommendation is it's recommended that the requirement for a practicable method of estimating the remaining life of the individual barrels be balanced against the requirement for the Mark 8 streamlined bullet. It's opined that a satisfactory bore gauging method could be devised to determine the remaining life using Mark 7 ammunition of remaining barrels. No reliable, and if you just look at the conclusions above, that no reliable and practicable method of determining the remaining life of individuals has been found, and the Barlow method is of no practical use for estimating the remaining life of barrels. And that was about inserting a gauge, a .306 gauge, into the barrel, which, despite all this, this is the 1941 manual, amended in 1946. By the time that manual is issued, they do have this gauge plug, .306 gauge, that was introduced and gives you a mechanism for estimating, and it's really clear actually, probable. It gives you an estimated life of how many rounds are remaining. Now, so this was a really simple question. what's the life of a Vickers barrel? And it's a really complicated answer because it's an unknown, because there's so many variables. But what this gauge does allow you to do is work out the probable remaining life in the of rounds in the barrel. So how does that work? Let's have a look. So this is our gauge that was issued to platoon commanders. These are really readily available on the collector's market. So hopefully you've got one in your Vickers collection and now you'll know how to use it, because it comes out of the outer casing like that. And you've got two options. If the gun's completely stripped down and you're just looking at using the barrels, you're going to screw it into the end there and you can insert it from the rear of the gun. However, we're not going to do that. We're going to insert it into the side so it creates an L shape like this. And then all we've got to do, if we do it like that, is undo the top cover, take the lock out. We probably should have removed the refusey spring, so we'll have to hold that back. And then what you can do is put that into the chamber of the barrel and see how far it goes. And we can see, you can't see, but I can see that it goes in to up to about 3 inches. Now, 3 inches in there shows that that barrel is a little bit degraded, but it still has quite considerable, some life left in the barrel itself. So a really quick and simple method of just checking what's the wear on the chamber. It's not doing anything to understand what the wear on the muzzle is, but it is at least checking what the wear on the chamber is. So just, like I say, again, you know, it's easy. Hold the crank handle back there and just insert directly into the chamber. See how far it goes. Read off of the the graduations. And let's say we inserted it and it went up to about, turn this the right way up for you, about 3 inches. So we can go back, check our table and see what 3 inches means in remaining life of the rounds. And of course we can pop this away. This did exist before 1946, we know that, because in a can loan officer, Rex Fendick talks about having one as a platoon commander, but the first time that little table appears in one of the manuals is in 1946. I believe it is in one of the Army Council instructions or one of the other instructions beforehand. So let's just check the table. So with 3 inches of lead into the chamber there, it tells us we've got about 2,600 rounds left on this barrel. So not much actually. We fire blank through it mainly, and you know there's clearly some life issues for that we'll have to source more barrels and work through it. So hopefully that was interesting. Clearly we're not doing overhead fire. So our accuracy isn't too much of a worry. If we were doing overhead over our own troops, we'd start to get concerned once that gauge gives us the reject level. But for blank firing, clearly it's not a concern. So there we go. I reckon that based on that and all the information that we've had, you'd estimate between 10 and 20,000 rounds for the life of a barrel. And in the paper that we wrote on 1 million rounds, I estimated about 18,000 rounds for the barrels that were being used in those circumstances. So, it varies. You've got loads of committee minutes, Ordnance Board memoranda talking about the hardening of steel for barrels. Really important to try and get this stuff right. Because it has that impact on accuracy and overhead fire. So let's say somewhere between 10 and 18,000 rounds for the life of a barrel based on the information that we've seen through the manuals. So our next question was, what was the daily allocation of ammunition for the Vickers machine gun? And there wasn't really one. On some operations, certainly earlier in the Great War and things like that, you'd start to get you might get a daily allocation, but it'd be really operation dependent. So it's better to look at what's the first line ammunition. What's the ammunition that's carried with the gun and readily available, all belted up and ready for the team. So in this case, we've got 14 boxes of ammunition equating to 3,500 rounds. That's what every gun would have had with it, either allocated to it in its limbered wagon or in its truck. Now, and that would be taken out and moved forward to the gun position, using the numbers 3, 4, and 5 of the gun team. And they would be carrying all of this. They'd only be carrying 2 boxes at a time. 1,000 rounds. 4 boxes at a time is 1,000 rounds. That's okay for a few hundred meters. It's not you can't carry that any further. So one box in each hand, 500 rounds you'd be carrying forward each time. So it's a few trips back and forth. And let's say when they're full, they're 22 pounds, 10 kilos each. Yeah, this one is full. Not all of them are. But yeah, 250 rounds in there. And that's what we'd have. Now, 3,500 rounds is what appears on the war establishments for many of the units, where you see this little table of on the man or with the gun. 3,500 rounds is there until about 1942-43, when we see them move from their 1,500 weight trucks to the universal carriers. The ammunition box changes to the disposable tin liners in a wooden crate, and that's what's being carried. It increases slightly. So let's take a look at that. So here we have the H29 box, so wooden box carrying 500 rounds each. They're carrying it in two 250 round ammunition liners. Now here, what they increase it to is 19 liners, so 4,750 rounds. So quite a jump, of which 9 of these boxes, 18 liners, 19, the 19th there loose on the top, because that was being carried in the bout box carrier attached to the gun ready to fire on the universal carrier. Now these are full. We have these full of inert for displays and for demonstrating the weight of this stuff. So each one of these weighs 50 pounds, 25 kilos. So you start to understand the logistics and the difficulties of machine gunnery. This is what's carried with the guns. And of course, your platoon reserve, you then have company reserve. And that's normally another couple of 100,000 rounds, depending on the unit, depending on what's being, how many guns it has. But certainly for the machine gun battalion, they'd have another 200,000 rounds being distributed, not necessarily distributed across the company and the battalion transport. So a significant amount of ammunition available on a ready basis, not necessarily a daily basis, but on a ready basis, that you start to see then how much is being used in the accounts, and you'll see like 500,000 rounds being used over a monthly period, quite happily, quite easily in some of the campaigns. So hopefully that answers that question. If you've got a Vickers on a display, you need at least 3,500 rounds, possibly 4,750 rounds to go with it. So another of the ammunition related questions this month was how many rounds of 303 were produced during the Second World War? Now, it takes quite a bit of digging into the contract ledgers to work this one out, so we're not 100% certain on these figures. We've only scratched the surface so far, because once you start to look at 303, you've got semi-armour piercing, incendiary, tracer, the Mark 8 Z stuff that was used with the Vickers, the Mark 7 appears in charger clips and is used with the Bren guns or available in cartons. All these different weapons are used in 303, so it's difficult to really pin down at the moment, but we'll endeavour to do so. It's just a massive research project. But what we have been able to do is dig out a report that was commissioned in 1950 to look at small arms ammunition production and how that worked in the UK. So the number of factories was scaled up massively during the war, and what they found was that there was production capacity for 215 million rounds of 303-inch ammunition per month. Now that includes those different varieties, but what Mark 8, the stuff that was being delivered factory packed in liners for the Vickers, you didn't have to fill it from cartons, although you could clearly, but what you had was factory packed liners. About 25%, a quarter of that figure, somewhere between 40 and 50 million rounds per month was being produced for the Vickers machine gun, or at the production capacity. Now there are two columns in the back of this report, and one talks about production capacity, 215 million, and the separate column that's not quite clear what it's defining is about 200 million, and it could be that that's the production capacity realised, and that aligns to a figure that we've previously sort of discovered and talked about, which is where there's nearly 8 billion rounds of small arms ammunition being produced, so that's anything up to 20 mil. Being produced during the Second World War. So absolutely huge capacity. This 215 million round figure as well, the caveats on that: production capacity but only in the UK. Does not include the Dominions, does not include, so Canada, Australia, doesn't include what we were purchasing from the United States as well. Remington ammunition was being purchased in some quite significant quantities. So it could be a much, much bigger figure, but that's a big research project that we're going to get stuck into over the next couple of years probably. But for the time being, if you think about 215 million rounds per month is what we had the capacity for in the United Kingdom at the height of the Second World War. So one of the common questions we've been asked is, how do you adjust the headspace on the Vickers machine gun? Now, it's an interesting problem, and it's not something that comes up mentioned in manuals for the Vickers machine gun that much, and the term isn't used really, because if the headspace is an issue, it won't form battery and therefore it won't fire. So it's sort of this integrally safe weapon from a safety perspective. But if you are getting separated cases, then what you can do is adjust the headspace in the field by taking out the lock here, and let's see if we can turn this around. So we take out the lock, and then what we do is we use one of these washers. So which one have we got here? This is the number 1 washer, because it won't focus. Sorry, if you can just see one hole. No, this has got 2 holes. Number 2 washer. So that's 5/1000ths of an inch thick. And then we should have a number 1 washer with just a 1 hole in there. That's the 0.03, so 3/1000th of an inch in there. If we use the teeth on the end of the combination tool, we slot in there, and we can undo the connecting rod nut. And if you notice, the crank on this gun is a Mark 1 star. It has a clip there to make life incredibly easy, because the front part of the crank doesn't fall forward. It stays upright because of this spring. Now, that was originally an aircraft piece of kit, but was eventually adopted on all cranks. So you might have a crank that's been unaltered. Clearly, it didn't happen to it, but many of them were altered later. So we're going to take the nut off, and then one of these washers, or 2 maybe, if you're in the field and it's happening to you, are placed over the spigot, and then that crank's put back on. Now, these are quite thin, as you have 3/1000th or 5/1000th of an inch. So we're not going to put them on because they're really painful to get off, and this gun fires quite well. So what you end up doing is putting them on, tightening it back up, and that should solve your separated cases problem. If you have, the other way, and the lock isn't sort of forming battery, or it's too short, then that might be an adjustment of the fusee spring to make sure that the fusee is the spring there is pulling the lock forward far enough. So don't run that too slack. Should be run at about £7 for ball ammunition. We run it really low. We run it at £3.5 for blank, because the blank we've got is quite powerful. So the PPU 1701 batch is what we're using at the moment. So we run it really low at £3.5 for that. But when we're firing ball, much better rate of fire with 7 rounds. Now, so if it's running the other way, actually so that's the field remedy, using the washers that are carried in the spare parts wallet, which is in the spare parts case. But you might need to change your side levers. You might need to, if they're too long, you might actually need to shave off a piece here and re-gauge it. Now, there is a gauge that does overall lock length. We have one of those. This lock is actually too long, but it runs well, so we're not too worried about it. And we don't run it with any washers in there. Before I put it away, though, it's worth mentioning the headspace gauge does have a role, and that is to make sure that rounds run through the extractor and through the jib properly. So if you've got headspace gauges for the Vickers, then use them by all means. You can't really tell whether anything's working. This certainly, once we've got it on and it goes in, absolutely fine, falls out. So you've got 2 headspace gauges. This is the 0.58, which should get stuck, and then I think it's the slightly different. I'll have to look it up to see which one of them does. So you end up using them on the jib. Two different headspace gauges to show one. The larger one should get stuck. whereas the next one should just pass through over the top, so you can, you know, pass through like that. I'll put it up on the screen what those are, so hopefully you've seen that. So the headspace gauge does have a roll, and clearly you can adjust it, but using the washers. But if you are needing more than that, then you need to get it on the bench, start to gauge it up properly for the overall length of the lock there. Normally length of lock and crank completely are going to have an impact, but it's probably separated cases, meaning you need to increase the say number of washers in here, possibly get a new set of side levers. We do have those if you need some, I believe. So get in touch if you need that, and hopefully that would resolve your problems. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to, and let us know of anything you'd like to see in the future. I look forward to hearing from you.